For a number of years, there's been an ongoing conversation between Manuel Mathieu and Edwidge Danticat around the language with which we tell stories of family, memory, displacement, and resilience. We are privileged today to be part of that ongoing dialogue as we celebrate Manuel's exhibition, World Discovered Under Other Skies and Dwelling on the Invisible, curated by Adize Wilford. Recently hailed in the New York Times. Let's do it. What has been achieved here is both an exercise in collaboration and trust. Thank you, Manuel, for the generosity that is intrinsic to your practice and which extended even beyond the walls of this institution to a community that included seniors from our Housing and Senior Services Art Program, MOCA's Teen Art Force, and our W.J. Bryan Elementary School junior docents. Before we begin, let me introduce our amazing moderator, Dr. Terri Francis. That's me. Hello. Dr. Terri Francis is the author of Josephine Baker's Cinematic Prism and an associate professor of cinematic arts at the University of Miami. Her curatorial work concerns film preservation and Afro-surrealism, which is the subject of her forthcoming book. Dr. Francis is a 2022 Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writing winner, and her articles have been published on Salon, Another Gaze, and a variety of academic journals. We'll be taking questions after the talk, but with that, I will turn it over to you, Terri.
Thank you. Thank you. Ooh, I need to take a deep breath. The hard part is over. We're all here together for this, really the third chapter of your conversation that you started. I feel like must have been 2020. So the first was a Zoom pandemic conversation, and now we're in the later part of that, wherever we are in that plague. And I'm honored actually to be trusted with this part of the conversation. Thank you, MOCA and Lauren and Amanda and the two of you. It's a pleasure to get to know you and have been immersed in your work and your thoughts in preparation for this conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I then have the pleasure of this praise song reciting your accomplishments. I'll start with Edwidge Danticat. Edwidge Danticat is the author of several books, including Breath, Eyes, Memory, an Oprah Book Club selection, Crick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, The Farming of Bones, The Dewbreaker, Brother, I'm Dying, Create Dangerously, Claire of the Sea Light, The Art of Death and Everything Inside, a Reese's Book Club selection, and National Book Critics Circle Awards winner. She is the editor of The Butterfly's Way, Voices from the Haitian Diaspora in the United States, which won Best American Essays 2011, Haiti Noir and Haiti Noir 2. She has written 7 books for children and young adults, including Anaconda, Behind the Mountains, 8 Days, The Last Mapu, Mama's Nightingale, Untwine, My Mommy's Medicine, as well as a travel narrative, After the Dance. Her memoir, Brother, I'm Dying, was a 2007 finalist for the National Book Award and a 2008 winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography. She is a 2009 MacArthur Fellow, a 2018 Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellow, a United States Artist Fellow, a 2-time winner of the Story Prize, the winner of the 2018 Neustadt International Prize, and the 2019 St. Louis Literary Prize, and the 2020 Vilsack Prize for Literature. Welcome, Edwidge Danticat. Manuel Mathieu lives and works in Montreal. He received his BFA from the Université du Québec à Montréal and his MFA from Goldsmiths University of London. Mathieu was an artist in residence at Academy School Solitude Stuttgart and the Pamela Joyner and Alfred J. Gufrida residency program in Sonoma, California. Recent solo exhibitions have been held at Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, HDM Gallery in Beijing, the Armory Show, New York, Tiwani Contemporary London, and Institute of Contemporary Art, London. He has participated in numerous group exhibitions held in Canada, the United States, and Europe, including Fondation Phi in Montreal, Paris Art Museum in our hometown, Frieze London, Art Basel, and Grand Palais Paris, which is a kind of hometown, I think, for many of us in different ways. Mathieu is one of the artists recognized by the 2020 SOBI Art Award. Welcome.
Thank you.
One of my favorite things to ask creative people is whether you think the arts had a role in your childhood, and if you could tell us how you remember that.
Well, thank you for having me, MOCA. Thank you for being such a wonderful moderator, Terri. I grew up in Haiti, like many of you already know. I left, I was 19 years old. I was lucky enough to be surrounded by art growing up. My mother was a collector, so I was always surrounded by art growing up, but I didn't necessarily realize that I was surrounded by art. It's only when I started making art that I started understanding how the work and the sculptures around me was actually shaping my mind and my sensibility, basically. So I think that shaped my vision of the world, and also my cousin that I encountered when I was 15 years old also opened my eyes in different ways of understanding what art can be in the world. Mario Benjamin, basically.
Yeah, so it was more atmosphere in the beginning, and then you came into a kind of consciousness.
Yes, a certain consciousness, and I have to say, when you're 15 years old, it doesn't matter that you're an artist, because you don't know what it is. You know, you're not trying to be an artist. You're just trying to do whatever you want to do. You're trying to be whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
So it wasn't important for me at the time to be an artist, but I was called one, because I was doing something that was not the usual route. You know, I was spending a lot of time with Mario. That's already a different journey. But it wasn't important for me to define that. And it's only when I left to study, then I understood that, you know, I was, maybe I was that thing, you know.
Yeah. What about you, Edwidge?
I'm thinking in terms of, well, first of all, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Manuel, and thanks to MOCA. I am thinking of like the visual, the kind of visual art that we took for granted, right? The fact that, for example, from the time that you're little, you have these camionettes, the tap-taps, right? And the camion, and that they were always so beautifully painted, and that they had these really bright visual depictions and messages, sometimes verses from the Bible. There's one saying when I was little that was in front of a tap-tap that I remember to this day, because I pondered it like, Wapale map travail. Like, you know, like the tap-tap was called Wapale map travail. You're talking, I'm working. And that's really something that I've sort of embedded in like my practice of life in general, and sort of like in terms of blocking out noise. And I just have a very clear image of seeing that on a tap-tap, and like of seeing like the Last Supper on tap-taps, on camions. So I think in that way, visual art, I think, followed us in a way that we took for granted, but was always around. And I remember when I read about, you know, Liotto, I know you're like obsessed with Georges Liotto, who was the person who first really started the metal work in Haiti, and he was inspired by funeral wreaths. And when I was a kid, I was completely just perplexed, but also intrigued by the fact that the funeral wreaths I remember were made of metal. So if they weren't flowers, they were, and Lyoto was, inspired by that, and just the fact that, just the continuity. Like we have like the whole school of Croix des Bouquets, still metal because Lyoto used to carve, funeral wreaths. So that's really my recollection.
If there was another art form that you would practice that you don't currently practice, do you have a sense of what that might be?
I don't want to say like Europe stuff because it just seems a lot more difficult. Like you need museums, you need like. I kind of like I like mine because it's solitary. It's kind of like you could do it by yourself. Because I'm looking at these big scale, like Manuel, we've been talking, as you've all been saying, for a long time, and I've written about his work, but I never really had a sense of the scale. So when I walk into like there, I'm like, okay, no, I'm no longer envious of you, brother. I'm like, you can have that. I will keep mine.
Yeah. And how did you come to writing? Actually, I don't think I know the story of how you came to be an author. There's a moment in Create Dangerously where you talk about returning to Haiti as an author and that being a particular kind of feeling. And I'm just curious how you became Edwidge Danticat, the practicing professional writer. What was that journey like?
Well, this is my daughter when she was about 3 was once watching me do one of these things, and then when we went home, she was like, "Yeah, that was the other Edwidge." So, I'll say how I became the other Edwidge. I love stories. I listened to my aunts and my grandmothers told a lot of stories, and I was a shy kid. I didn't think I would. There was a lot of performing and a lot of sort of excitement to the stories but when my uncle gave me a book when I was 4, Madeleine, like in the house in Paris, it was in French, and I thought, oh, I love this because I could go in a corner and be alone with that story, like that intimacy for me, and I was like, whatever that is, I want to do that. I didn't know how you do it, but I wanted to do that.
Just noticed that this has been sinking. It's going to be in my lap any moment. All right, thank you. No, thank you for that. Because I'm always curious about that transition, and then I think for both of you, going between Creole, French, and English seems like several stages of self-creation as you're creating your work. And I'd love to hear from you also. And when we were talking earlier, you told me about all the different tours that you've been doing, and this moment when, what was it? Someone took the mic from you and said, now, when look at him. When you have kids that are scribbling, that are doing creative things, let them do it. This is important. This could be the path to something important. I was struck by that moment too, because creativity, when we talk about create dangerously, sometimes it's kids that are being creative is, I don't know, disturbing, annoying, disappointing. Parents are scared, like, what's going to happen? So what was that like for you as a young creative person, whether if you remember back to being 10, but then also this really important moment in your teenage years when you started to define yourself that way?
I'm going to bounce on what Edwidge said about the solitary aspect of your practice. Before the museums and before the context of showing your work, it is a solitary work also to be in the studio. And I always understand the studio as a space inside of myself where I go to think. You know,
Yeah.
it's a physical space. That's why it could be a desk, I suppose, for a writer, or but for me, it's a place that is mimicking a box in my head where I can go and spend time with myself and organize my thoughts. I'm saying that because I think in general, and people who knows me for a long time, I can be a very solitary person. So when I discovered art, it was a way for me to exist outside of what everybody was doing, but was still growing in the process. So I was alone. I spent a lot of time alone. I worked on my room and all of that. I did an installation, and Mario started giving me paintings, canvases, so I started working on them. So I was alone, but I was still feeding my imagination. And to get back to what you were saying for the kids, I think it's important to nurture a space like that, and anybody, as a matter of fact, not just the kids, because I think as a kid, when they take away these kind of natural mechanism of creating alternative worlds in their heads, you kind of, my understanding is like you take away the possibility of seeing different futures of yourself. It's kind of a line. You see like a straight line, and thankfully, I was a rebel enough that I wanted to exist in many dimensions. And art was the possibility for me to be that and to keep on being that to this day. The reason why I touch so many mediums is because I'm kind of still seeking to appear in many forms, in many dimensions.
Was it your pursuit of art that caused you to leave Haiti, or was it something else? What was happening for you?
I think reality is it's not just my pursuit of art, because I was making art in Haiti. I was working with Roberto Stevenson. I don't know if you know him as a photographer. He taught me a lot of photography in the darkroom, for example. We worked a lot like that. And he taught me about documenting objects, for example. So it wasn't a matter of leaving Haiti to do art. I remember I was giving a tour, not a tour, but a sort of like a little conference in Bel Air to the artists from Bel Air, Bel Air. And we were talking about, they were talking about how difficult it is to make it, and I was saying, what do you think is missing? They weren't like thinking about leaving the country. They were like, we want to stay here. We just want to have people come see what we do. We don't want to leave. And I can relate to that, because now when you ask me where do I want to stay, I want to go back home. I want to stay. I want to experience the country as an adult, because I left when I was 19 years old. So to get back to your question, I left because I finished my high school. And to be fair, I was a really difficult teenager. So I think my parents, they were also kind of...
In what way?
Don't put me on the spot like that.
I think he has some relatives here too.
Yeah, it's kind of like...
C'est toi qui as...
I know I opened the door, but let me just say that
Sure.
I was hard to control.
Sure.
That's
fair.
that's kind of like, and I didn't mind, not being hard. I mean, my father would say, this is gonna happen. She's like, I don't care,
Yeah.
So it was hard for them to compose with a kid who wasn't afraid,
Yeah.
So when I left, it was more like, okay, like we have this opportunity for you to go, so you should go. So that was like, I was like, yeah, I'll go, And then what happened is that I arrived at my grandmother's house, and who taught me like love, pure love, and like accepting me for who I was. And accepting people is not cherishing them necessarily, or telling them what to do, but it's just to give them space. for them to be who they are, and believing that they will become who they're meant to be. So that was very precious as a turbulent kid, you know, to kind of like have this space, and I found my way through that.
I need to sit with that. That's beautiful. Yeah. I feel like people want to, I don't know. Well, I'll sit with that for a second. It's very moving. This feels like the right place to maybe talk about how you, because even as you're coming to your creative practices individually, you're also coming to some type of reckoning with Haiti, I think. And I wonder if you could maybe talk about that relationship, how like where is where is Haiti located in your creativity, in your mind? Your works, both of your practices are obviously different, literature and the visual arts, but also it seems like your relationship to representation, to figuring is quite different. Although in your work, Edwidge, there are layers, texture, complexity. It's the sense of history, of memoir, of life feels more tangible. I could also say the opposite too, that there is something ephemeral in the work, and in your paintings, Manuel, I've heard you talk about them as abstract and as conceptual rather than representational and rather than figurative. And when I brought my class to tour the exhibition with you, you talked about abstraction as being in process, as moving out of something into maybe out of reality into irreality, or maybe the other direction. So I just wonder where Haiti fits into that, or like what Haiti is in your practice. Is it a touchstone, a source of inspiration, an incitement, an excitement? How would you put that into words? Where is Haiti?
I would say tout bagay, like everything.
Yeah.
It's memory, but it's real. It's the people we love. It's the places in Haiti we love. It's the places I remember. It's the places I go back to more recently. It's the people on the WhatsApp every day. It's really, I mean, it's in the art for me the way it is in my life. It's you know, my parents had this thing that they used to say all the time, you know, nous quitte Haïti, mais Haïti pas quitté nous. Like, you know, we left Haiti, but it didn't leave us.
Right.
So, you know, I think we've all heard these different versions of that. Like, there's a piece of Haiti that we carry with us, and the work is, I think, a way of making it visible to others, or to and the others too. When I say others, I mean sort of like younger people in my family, other people in my family, the wider world too. But I'm often thinking of things that seem to be slipping away. Like both my parents have passed away, so the stories they told me, for example, you know, are gone, and so I kind of want to pass those on, because I want my nieces and nephews who've never been to Haiti to know what we knew. And one of the things I'm very happy with until recent events, that I was able to take my children there. You know, my niece Helen is here. She went to Haiti with us. There was a moment, you know, where like all these, this whole generation of our family was like really wanted to go to Haiti, and part of that, I think, was born out of the excitement of the elders for Haiti, because there's this generation too, like my generation, like where your parents, the people who grew up during the dictatorship, like they would say, you know, Haiti was beautiful, Haiti was great, and then the child would say, I want to go. No, c'est pas, you know, ce n'est pas le moment, c'est pas. You know, there was a time when I was going to Haiti a lot, and I was always running into people's children on spring break trips to Haiti. Like, I was like, does your mom know you're going to the Decameron? And they're like, no. So that whole, I think, all of that, I think, is embedded in that in a way that I think there's these bridges that I think are important to create, and that's why like I try to write, like I love writing about Manuel or writing about a photographer, right? Because I think we have to also reach wider to build these bridges, you know. And I was so moved, for example, Manuel does a painting called Brother I'm Dying that he did on Brother I'm Dying, and to also see that story through his eyes and the way these stories are passed on, you know, in a linearly, like across, but also, you know, down through the generations, I think is very, very important.
Yeah, and actually, when we were talking earlier, I was really moved by, I hope you don't mind me sharing, Manuel's description of how he received your book, that he felt a sense of, well, you can tell us, a sense of location, of belonging.
Well, that book, for the one we were lucky enough to read it.
Create Dangerously.
Create Dangerously, this book.
Which we both have, we both studied.
Yes. It's a book that went profoundly under my skin for many, many reasons. I mean, the book starts about the execution of Numa. And I have a painting of Numa, and I didn't even know that we were working together on this, you know what I mean? And when I was giving also the tour, to make a small parenthesis, to the eldest, some people told me in the tour I was there, looking at the execution. You know, I was there, and they're from Jérémy, etc., etc. So it really made me understand that I was carrying something. You know, I was a messenger of something. Because I think as artists, I mean, I understand my work as someone who's participating in preserving our legacy as human beings and nurturing the connections that we have to each other. So, and I don't think it's hazardous that we're born on the lands that we're born, because the land that we're born carry the legacy of that land. So being born in Haiti, and you talked about that, about Basquiat in the book, about how he said that, I think, said he's carrying the DNA of his culture, whether he's addressing it or not, it's part of who he is. So I think being born in Haiti and you know, understanding later on that choosing to be an artist is also taking the responsibility of preserving our humanity to a certain point. I can't act like I wasn't born there, that I wasn't part of that legacy, you know, and to talk about it in many different ways. Talk about it from my personal experience, talk about it from historical moments. I mean, and to get to what you were saying about the book is, I felt like I was part of something when I read the book. I felt like I was part of a world, of an imagination, you know? It's kind of like when you're reading Edwidge's book, you enter a world of the invisible, because she takes your hands and she takes you into places, and I could recognize a lot of these places because I visited them alone in my studio, you know, on my side of the world. But then to have someone pointing in those directions, and for me to be like, oh my God, I know, I understand what you mean, you know. So it's one thing to feel like you're related or connected to the world, but when you have such a strong connection, it reassures me, you know. It feels like I'm part of that conversation or this imagination, you know. And I think it's considering how fragile the context of, you know, the lives of people in Haiti are, and I've been in the last years, we're losing a lot of things. A lot of things are disappearing, like properly, you know, not just like conceptually, people, ideas, places,
Institutions.
Yes,
institutions.
institutions, yeah.
Like, it's just like slowly vanishing, and the concern I have is kind of like, it's not that even I have to accept that. It is what it is. You know, with the earthquake, there's a lot. The shape of Port-au-Prince, the face of Port-au-Prince changed. There was a, like you said in the book, there's a before and there's an after.
Yes,
There's
yeah.
a lot of things that are, and that disappearance. You know, I did a painting that's called "The Poetry in Our Disappearance." I'm very aware of it, but at the same time, I'm trying to like grab something that is ahead of me also, to kind of like link these things together, because strangely enough, when I was growing up in Haiti, we never talked about the dictatorship, for example. Not in school, not with my friends. It seems like it didn't exist. And I was like, how? How can we just forget about that? Saying I had to go back and revisit it. I mean, I wanted to.
Right, and then, but then doing that from outside Haiti, how is that experience? Or, because I'm curious what it would be like reading this book and feeling that sense of connection and belonging, but being physically apart from it. I mean, I know this is classic, the migrants' experience, but I think it's worth exploring, particularly because there was this sense of, as you just said, Edwidge, like being able to go back to Haiti a lot. Do you still feel that this is there going to be another after, where, oh, there was a time before when we could, and now we're in this other after where we can't go back, or can't go back in the same way, or...
I mean, we have to. There has to be a kind of like definitely a strong humility about that, right? Because our not being able to go back is a mild inconvenience compared to people who are being shot at, who are being displaced, who, and you know, I've been speaking to for this couple of pieces that I've been trying to write about, to artists, right, in Bel Air and other places who have had to like put their art with friends, or just like are creating a very different way. And I was speaking to an artist in Bel Air who was saying, she said that, you know, I was able to live. She makes paillettes, voodoo flags. Right, she was like, I was able to live before people would come, and we were proud to show them our space. But now, you know, you can't. And she was equating, like she said, you know, when people come, you're an artist, but when you have to like basically smuggle your art to some remote place, where like then you're like you're just like a merchant who's trying to sell something. So she was making the sense like sort of like that dignity of like saying I've created this, right? It's art. Like that's taken away by even the physical limitations of where you're supposed to be, and so just like having those conversations with people. So I think our situation must be addressed like with a kind of humility, right? And then just like with listening, like to be able to listen to what people are saying, and offer help in whatever ways we can. But the writing from a distance is I've always approached, I think and I see in your work too, I think because of the way your work is framed, there is a kind of blur that it acknowledges that I am looking at this from a distance, that I don't live there, but I'm still allowed to say, because there's like a million of us.
Yeah, and you know, if you permit me, I just want to read a little paragraph from the first chapter, which is I think is the chapter that gives us the title of the book, Create Dangerously, which gives us the title for our conversation, where you talk about what you put into such succinct, beautifully crafted sentences, what we're now talking about, the work of the immigrant artist. You say, the immigrant artist shares with all other artists the desire to interpret and possibly remake his or her own world. So though we may not be creating as dangerously as our forebears, though we are not risking torture, beatings, execution, though exile does not threaten us into perpetual silence, still while we are at work, bodies are littering the streets somewhere. People are buried under rubble somewhere. Mass graves are being dug somewhere. Survivors are living in makeshift tent cities and refugee camps somewhere, shielding their heads from the rain, closing their eyes, covering their ears to shut out the sounds of military aid, helicopters. And still, many are reading and writing quietly, quietly. Yeah. That repetition of somewhere, I think, speaks to a solidarity across sufferings and the kind of listening that you're talking about and connection across places. You speak also in the book about how your, you say something like being from a place like Haiti, being from a place like Freetown, like Kingston, shapes how you see the United States, how you see the world. And I wonder for both of you, as you're kind of being shaped by the Haiti that takes form inside your imagination and that comes through your work, how is it, or are you aware of even how it's shaping how you think about the world more broadly? Like what is, in one of your conversations, Matthew spoke of, Manuel. I have two first names also, and this happens. But you spoke of wanting to, it comes back to your commitment to being conceptual. It was something about wanting to determine what was most precious, that Haiti was there, but there was also something within it or around or through it that you were working towards because you wanted to be sure you were working urgently on what was most precious to you. And I wonder, that was a couple years ago. You probably maybe don't remember exactly. But I wonder if you could talk about that. What is your Haitian perspective, or what's precious to you about cultivating where Haiti can take you in your work?
This is a complex question. I'll try to be
Il
as
y a beaucoup de questions
straightforward
là-dedans.
and as honest as I can. I think thankfully, I chose a path that, in that solitude that we talked about in the studio, where I spent a lot of time trying to understand, to reconnect with myself. Okay? So in the process of reconnecting, I also had to dig about my past and the past of my family, and also where I'm coming from. And I was born in '86, right after the end of the dictatorship. And when life kind of sent me a message, to the form of a big shake, a big hit to the head, to kind of like realign myself. And during that time, I became very fragile, and I had to sit down with myself and ask myself questions. I was working on a show that's called, on a book from George Bataille at the time, called Story of the Eye. And after the accident, I asked myself, if this was my last show, why would it be? Would it be about George Bataille? And the answer was no. The answer was no. So then, if it was no, then what would it be? And there's something about creating dangerously, but there's also creating urgently, you know?
Yeah.
When you're actually creating something that needs to be addressed, it needs to come out. And I ask myself, what are the things that I can talk about that are precious to me and that I believe I'm the only one that can bring that perspective to these things. Um, and I have to go into my personal life, my family, and asking simple questions like, why was I exposed to so much violence growing up, for example? And it's a simple questions people ask themselves every day. Why was I alone in the house all the time? And then slowly you start retracing certain realities that you were exposed to. And that's kind of how Haiti or the legacy of this country find its way back into my work. And the the fact that I understood before that I can use my work to think about the world, but I can also use it to say something about it, you know. And I sat down and I had to really address that. What are the things that I want to talk about that are necessary to me to be addressed? Because if it was on my last show, what it is that I want to talk about? And it's a good question because I think urgency is healthy. You know, the right dose of urgency forces you to move things that are in the way.
It brings clarity.
It brings a certain form of clarity. So uh, that's how I started working on the dictatorship, for example. You know, because I felt like little stories. My grandfather on the side of and that's how people here will relate to that. Haitians will relate to that. On the side of my mother, my grandfather was a colonel under Jean-Claude for a short period of time. And on the side of my father, a lot of his family members were killed by the dictatorship. And there was my parents together, you know, and they are having kids, and that was the context that I was born in, you know, that we were born in, because I have two little sisters. So then it's because we didn't talk about that. It wasn't addressed. But then it's because I was digging that I was like, Mom, what about this? What about that? And they were, you know, answering questions and things like that, and understanding how tightly everything was put together in the country, because it's a big and it's a small country at the same time. So this is, I talked about Haiti in many forms, but I'm gonna stop here just because it's a good way to understand how I got to do that.
Yeah.
You know. And then after that, a lot of new things opened. I worked on artists from Rivière Froide. I did a bunch of other things in relation to Haiti. I'm doing a documentary right now, but that's kind of how it started, or it became urgent to me.
Yeah. The other word that's there though is desire. Like with the novel that you referenced, the George Bataille work is an erotic novel. Extremely erotic. And it's
Nasty erotic.
Yeah, it's nasty erotic.
But it's a small book, so you can read it in like an hour or something. But it was you know, I was in Goldsmiths, and it was like, this book was so fun. It's funny. I think it was a funny book. It was very funny.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like surrealist humor, surrealist erotic humor. And but it made me think that there are elements of that aren't entirely put to the side once you took this new direction, in that you're still thinking about passion, connections between people. There's a life force in your work. There's texture. It's very physical, layered. You've moved through multiple mediums, the moving image, ceramic. You're using fabric. There's some photography along with the paintings. So there's definitely like an aliveness to what you're doing. You know what I mean? It's not labor, but it's also like desire, you know, something that you want to do, and that you must be moving from practice to practice through, I don't know, like a kind of improvisation, or
I would say
what are-
vital.
vital?
I would use the word vital more
Okay.
than desire. It's
Okay.
like an energy, you know. There's a
Oh,
vital
vitality.
energy that comes with it for me.
Yeah.
And
You
now
relate
you've
to
moved
that?
to video, right? Now you're doing video.
Yes.
Yeah, the fire video.
Yes.
Diffé.
Diffé, yeah. There's a video in. What do you want to know about Diffé?
No, I'm. We're supposed to ask. Can I ask my question?
Oh
now?
yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, Diffé is in there. I was curious about like using images that are out in the world in other ways, right? Like we all like live on the WhatsApp, Haitian WhatsApp, right, where you get the videos, and sometimes you're like, please don't, but you get them anyway. And so Diffé has like images that we would recognize from the news. So I wanted to know about that process of using images, because your work in a way has a kind of, and we've talked about this, it's kind of there's a blur that allows me to imagine myself in it, that can allow all of us to imagine ourselves in it. We all see different things like that, that psych Rocha test, right? But Diffé, it's very clear, it's images that already exist in the world. I wondered what that was going from, that kind of abstract to like using existing images.
For me, well, first of all, the images that I used for Diffé was a series of images that was taken by Rachel Magloire, that you probably know. So she's a good friend of mine, and I told her that I was working on this idea of fire and protest, like where does fire sits in our use of anger, and what does it symbolize for us, you know? That's kind of how it started, because there's a lot of fire that took place in Port-au-Prince that was never stopped. You know, the fire is like it's a weapon to a certain point. Now, in terms of using material that already exists, for me, it's like collages. You know, it's kind of using something that is already its own thing and putting it in a different context. And I do that often in my paintings, but in a conceptual way. You know, it's kind of like, for example, if I'm painting, there's a painting in the show that's called Sacred Burden, and it's two ideas that are actually coexisting, and it's a found object also, or found element, if I can put it like that. It's a bag of coil that I got, that I put on the canvas, and it's part of the painting basically. So, but the idea of Sacred Burden is that sometimes being from Haiti and experiencing emotionally, sometimes the legacy of being Haitian can feel like an emotional burden, you know, because you're always concerned. You know, you talk about the WhatsApp, you don't know what you're gonna get. Every day there's something, you know. I mean, starting from, you know, the gangs to like coup d'etat to like murdering the president, which is symbolically the first Haitian. You know, what kind of message that is also sending to us Haitian who are just inside and outside of the country. So this is kind of like the I forgot my idea. Where was I going with it? Yes, Diffé. Yeah, so Sacred Burden, it's something that can be emotionally heavy, you know, because you want things to get better, bottom line, you know, and not just in an abstract way. You want people to have better lives. You want people to live with dignity, you know, all of us, not just like a part of the population, you know. So and sometimes you're facing a lot of emotional obstacles, or even around you certain obstacles to get your point. But at the same time, it's a burden, but at the same time, it's very sacred, this burden. It's very sacred to me. So I think just the fact that I'm using certain concepts and I'm putting them together, it's a mechanism that I'm very familiar with in my painting So it wasn't difficult for me to use these kind of found elements and put them together, because I was the editor of the video. So I had the raw materials, which was, you can imagine, it was filming of protests and of still images that was, still shots. So I had to understand, what is going on here? What is the story? How do I put things together? How do I combine the music, the singing, the protests, the sounds, the gunshots, and how do I transition so you feel like you're being catered to? Because I don't want it to feel like I'm just putting images or videos and just figure it out. No, there's a sense of curation going on, editing, basically. So it wasn't hard for me to kind of use that mechanism, in the process of making Diffé, for example.
Yeah, this makes me actually want to talk about the title of our conversation and of your book, Edwidge, Create Dangerously. What does it mean, really? Like, is it creating dangerously in particular situations, create dangerously, like, for some, like, creation itself is dangerous? I'm curious what you're expressing with that, and then with Manuel, what do you hear in that provocation, or manifesto, or description?
I mean, it's I guess it's in line of a lineage, because the way that the book came about is I was asked to give a lecture named after Toni Morrison at Princeton. Right. And I thought, and she was going to be sitting right there, like in the front row. And I said to myself, what do I have to say to Toni Morrison? And then I started going back to thinking about Numa and Duen, that story and all that I'd heard about them when I was growing up, and also what that means in terms of creation, right? Because my uncle used to tell the story about how there was like a literary club, like a young readers in Bel Air at that time. Yeah, and they would like hide these books. They were reading Camus, who actually Albert Camus, who came up with Create Dangerously. Like he, was really always like in French the essay is called L'artiste et son temps. Like was always Camus was wrestling as a lot of Haitian writers like were too. Like Félix Maurice Oloa, who was in these parts, and I was lucky to have walked around Miami at the same time that he was still among us. And just all these, like what it means to create in your time. And for Félix Maurice Oloa, that means, like for him, it meant, so during the dictatorship, he put in Antigone in Creole, right? So that you could still talk about people who were killed and whose, like you couldn't go claim the body of a loved one on the street. That's the story of Antigone. That was the story, that could have been the story of a mother during the dictatorship. And he was transposing that so that, the people in power, like people wearing togas, so they couldn't get the full message. So that was creating dangerously. And that's how, and there were so many people in our lineage as Haitians who had that, from like Stéphane Alexis, who was murdered by the dictatorship. And so that was like, okay, that's what I had to tell Toni Morrison about this story. And the beautiful thing about that, at least on 2 occasions, she retold that story. And I was like, oh, she heard me. She heard Haiti. And so, but to me, it means different things to different writers. And I think the different moments will call for different. For some people, it's an emotional risk, right? Like especially these days where things get broadcasted so quickly, so easily. And for some people, it's real physical danger, So it's, this was not meant to be like a prescription for other people. It was actually a way to honor these dangerous creators in my lineage to make me a little braver when I need to be.
Yeah. We're gonna
That's
before
beautiful.
we're gonna open it up to
Wow.
questions, but I want to hear from you first before we do that. Yeah.
That's really beautiful, what you just said. And I want to add to that. I mean, if I can. I mean, actually, I'm not going to add to that because that was just like perfect. When what you just said, my interpretation is very personal because when I was reading these people, whether it's Numa, you talk about not in the book, but you just referred to Jacques Stéphane Alexis that I also painted, and I painted actually they never found his body, but I imagined his execution. You know, I was like, oh, let me, because I felt like there was some similarities between me and him. You know, I felt like, oh, it could have been me. You know what I'm saying? And so to get back to the book, every chapter talks about a very particular reality, whether it's with hurricanes in relation to the States, whether it's with Numa in the beginning, whether it's with Jean-Dominique. It's just, and all these things that you were referring to, I knew exactly what you meant. You know, it was as if you were describing, again, my imaginary world. You know, my legacy. You were pointing into that legacy of this is what it means to be part of a legacy of danger. You know, where taking certain decisions or positions can actually take you to your grave. You know, and even though I talk about certain things in relation to the dictatorship, I'm also doing a lot of other things in parallel to that, that is pointing certain unfair situations, you know. So I think it's a chance. It's a chance to be able to. I experience it as a chance because it forced me to live a purposeful life, you know, to understand that, you know, to live with knowing that I'm creating with that kind of possibility that anything could end at any given time. It always keep me on my toes.
It goes
Always.
back to the urgency that you were
Yes.
talking
I didn't
about.
want to use urgency, but that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. You know, I
Yeah.
didn't want to loop into that, but that's exactly what it is, and
Yeah.
it's very important. And
Yeah, there's a writer, Annie Dillard, who says that, you know, we should write as though we were terminal patients writing for other terminal patients, because that's the human
That's the human condition.
condition, yeah.
Yeah.
it's nice.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm sure we have comments. Laura, do you want to?
Absolutely.
We won't be able to
It
see
is
them, though.
incredible to have been here with you. Please, a round of applause for our panel, our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you.